Hi, we know that a lot of you belong to churches where you would like your church community to be more welcoming to people with disabilities and their families. We also know that it's difficult sometimes to figure out what the first steps are. Today we're going to give you some practical first steps for your church that will help you be more welcoming and open to family members and people with disabilities.
To introduce ourselves, I'm Brian, this is Paul. We're both practical theologians, and we're both parents of children with disabilities.
Right. I think the first thing that's important to say, Brian, is if you have a family that comes into church and they have a child or an elderly person or an adult with them who has a disability, you know they're motivated to come to church.
Well, that's a little bit different because most people come into church just out of curiosity, or they just drift in and out. Why is it different with people with disabilities?
I'm glad you asked that, because I'm very committed to going to church, and so I put in the work when my kids were younger, but I'm telling you what, it's a lot of work. So if you have a family member, whether they're a school-age child, a teenager, an adult, or someone elderly, and you have them with you, they're living with you, then the week is tough. First of all, you have to negotiate school. You have the IEPs. School's a non-negotiable. Your kids have to go to school. However, it's a lot of work every day to make sure that your children are receiving the education that they need. It's tiring. So second, once they get out of school, it's not like the kid goes to sleep like a toy and you can turn it on when school time occurs again. No. At home, and this is whether they're adult going to school or someone staying at home, someone going to work, we need to have services, again, for our children or our adults. When they're at home, they need help, and it depends on what kind of disability they have, but everyone needs certain levels of care. And working through the social services system, it's hard. It takes time and energy and constant negotiation. So when you think about these things which are essentials for our kids, and then you think about church, Sunday morning, we could be sleeping in and we could be allowing our kids or the person to kind of do their own thing a lot easier than getting people dressed, not even dressed up, just getting people dressed, getting people ready, getting in a car. Transportation can be a nightmare, and then showing up at a church. So when we show up at a church, we're motivated, and often we're already tired out.
That makes a lot of sense. So the people who are coming with special needs, or families of those with special needs, they're borderline spent. They really need something to come to them when they get there.
Right.
What do they need to come to them?
Well, first of all, they're coming in, they're tired, and their lives are tired. My life, I'm tired a lot. And people with kids with special needs or family members with special needs, caregivers, they're tired a lot. And so what we don't need is to come in and start a new series of negotiations. We don't need to come in and have another place where we've got to work through all that and where it's going to take more energy from us. So the first step that you need to do at your church, get over those initial fears that you'll say something wrong, get over that anxiety, have people looking for families with a member with a disability and walk up to them, welcome them, and you don't have to point the person out, but you can say, we're glad you're here. Are there any ways we can help you? Are there any ways we can serve you so that you'll have a great worship experience with us? Now that's straight talk. Do you appreciate it?
Absolutely. Straight talk is so useful and so refreshing because you realize, wait, they somehow have an experience that allows them to see what's going on here. And they can see the tiredness in our eyes or in the eyes of someone who's spent the morning trying to book a wheelchair-friendly taxi. Once that tiredness and vulnerability and lack is recognized, a whole new world opens up. So what's the first step?
Right. So even if you don't recognize that they're tired, I'm telling you they're tired. So if you come in and you give them some straight talk, you say, how can we serve you? The family will breathe a sigh of relief. Immediately, that's language to them that says, we're welcome here and we don't have to negotiate this. So then, once you do that, the first step that you can take is, once you've heard what they need, is to get that person, and you should have a few of them in your church that you can recruit, but get that one person who might connect well with that teenager or child or elderly adult, and who will go and spend their time with them in whatever. Say we're going to youth group. Our youth group is down there, and we're going to have so-and-so come along with you. So Jim's going to come along with you, and come along with your son Andy and with you, and we'll show you where the youth room is, and if Andy's comfortable there, Jim will stay there with him just to make sure that things work out for him, and to find out what needs he might have that he needs to be met that aren't typical perhaps, or just whatever needs that are there. Jim's going to be aware of them, and he's going to help your son.
That makes a lot of sense, and we had a great experience of that at one church many years ago in Durham, North Carolina, and it turned out to be a perfect solution, because actually there was a young teenage girl who was just having a difficult time in Sunday school, and she found that she really enjoyed spending time with our son, and it was an enriching experience for her. And one thing that seems really useful about that approach is it gets around the idea that the only way to deal with disability in churches is to have a big program that's set up and infrastructure heavy. But are you saying that these buddies don't need any training at all?
No. What you do, you want to have a program that's friendly. You ask church members, how many of you would be interested? Or instead of just making a general announcement and asking church members, you think of individual people in your church. Oh, they're very loving and empathetic and caring. So you may ask and make a general announcement, but also you may approach 3 or 4 people who you think they would do a good job. And you're not asking them for a big commitment. You're asking them to spend some time on Sunday or on a Wednesday night, one-on-one with one individual. So you ask those people. Well, once you've asked those people, there are some things that we need to know about spending time with people with disabilities, or we won't recognize and learn their language, or be able to kind of guess or intuit what they need. So 1, 2, or 3 hour training session with a professional. You may have a social worker in your church, or a special ed teacher. You may have a psychologist who works a lot with kids on the autistic spectrum, or you can also call the county. And I know a lot of churches say, oh, county government, but the Department of Mental Health will be happy to bring in a professional on a Saturday if you have 5 or 6 people, or 10 or 20 people who would like to be a buddy to someone with a disability. And you can have a 2 to 3 hour training session where they will explain to you what are the basics of being a buddy, being a friend to someone with a disability while they are in a church service. So the buddy is not alone. They're still in the service with everyone else. And by the way, keeping the child or the person with the disability in the service with everyone else is far more enriching. And when we talk with people with disabilities, they want to be included with the rest of the group. The buddy is just there to make sure that what they need is met. So we get a buddy and we get them some basic training.
And the effect of that takes us back to where things began, that people get a break. People feel like it's called respite, when someone else is taking some of the responsibility to look after a loved one who has special needs, or just give a break to everybody who's doing the caring. And with that comes friendships and trust and relationship, as the details of what will make it a more comfortable and supportive experience get hammered out over time. And the commitment of the church to being with people becomes more evident in ways that are life-giving, that show that church doesn't have to be a place where we pretend that everything's okay and that we don't need help and that we don't need each other.
Right, so the person with the disability has a richer experience, their needs are met. the family member gets an hour to worship or to make relationships, or maybe 2 hours where they get to meet some people, they get to worship, and they don't have 100% responsibility to take care of the person who they're a caregiver for. They're still there, they're still available. If there's an emergency or something's misunderstood, they can come, the one-on-one, or someone can come and say, hey, could you give us a hand? We don't know what we need right now. So they're still there, but the pressure's off. It's now a team experience, and caregivers love that. So the person with a disability loves to be included in a group because often they're very lonely and don't have friends. The family members who are caregivers, they love having the pressure taken off so that they can worship and enjoy their time together. One other thing we were going to talk about that's pretty easy, again, for a church. So you don't need a big program. You're not asking your congregation members for a huge commitment. It's something that will help you, and this will have a huge impact on your church and on your community. One other idea, though, is respite, the concept of giving your caregivers some time. You can slowly expand that. And any suggestions about how you could expand that without making your church create another program and have to pour in all kinds of volunteer hours and resources?
Well, if buddies are getting to know a child with special needs, let's say, and they're becoming comfortable with one another and developing a certain rapport, of course that can take place outside of the time at church. You could invite the person out for an outing, or come over and let the caregivers or the parents out for a little break, and that would be world opening and relation building.
That's really good. And perhaps some of your one-on-one buddies say, well, I'm comfortable in a church setting where there's other people around to help me if I get stuck. But if I were to go over and do it one-on-one, I'm not yet comfortable or confident that I won't get stuck at their home if they're not in the home with me. So instead, you could do a date night thing once or twice a year at your church. And maybe there's some kids with disabilities who have a buddy, and maybe the buddies and some extra volunteers could be at the church, so now you're not alone, you're not one-on-one, and you have some extra expertise, even if it's only once or twice a year. And you can say, hey, invite your kids. We want to invite your kids to an event on Friday night. We're going to watch a movie or do something together for 2 hours. Why don't you go out and have dinner? And I'm telling you that for parents and for other caregivers, that's like a dream come true. You may think, well, we have a date night every week, and yeah, when we had little kids, it was tough. But for us, it's like, we never get a date night. We never get time alone because we're never off duty. So allowing them to have that moment, again, doesn't take a lot of time, doesn't take a lot of organization, you don't need a program, and you can have huge results. So little marginal things we can do that have huge results. And that's how we would suggest that you start a movement toward involving people with disabilities and their families in your church. Do we want to summarize it? Nah?
That's
Okay.